Thank you all for being here. Director General, can you talk a little bit about the role of electrification and particularly heat pumps in eliminating Europe's overdependence on Russian fossil gas?
Yes, thank you. Electrification in general and the deployment of heat pumps is an important part of becoming independent from Russian gas, Russian fossil supplies, but it's also an important part of the overall energy transition. We're going to see a significantly increased electrification of our energy systems as a necessary part of the transition. It's going to rely on renewables, but also nuclear, as just discussed, and a move away from fossil. In that context, heat pumps are a very interesting option. We use about 1/3 of our natural gas to heat homes, and if we can replace just some of that with heat pumps, we're better off. In addition to that, heat pumps are significantly more energy efficient, so it's an overall saving as well as a saving in fossil. So that is part of our repower plan. We've got a heat pump plan to secure the fastest possible rollout of heat pumps. In some of our member states last year, and I can take one example, Poland, there was an increase of 120% in the installation of heat pumps last year. So quite an interesting example of the response to the crisis.
Director General, with regard to ESG, which our chairman brought up, do you think that governments should dictate governance priorities for private businesses, or should we generally leave that to the market and to the boards of those businesses to make those decisions?
Those decisions are business decisions, and for companies, the government role, the way we have approached it in Europe, is to set out guidance of what would we consider green investments. That's our taxonomy, but it's obviously for market operators.
So basically a standard, and leave the decisions to the businesses themselves.
Indeed, and not a binding standard,
Right.
a type of guidance.
Yeah. Dr. Light, U.S. utilities depend on imports of Russian-enriched uranium for about 20% of their needs in our fleet of commercial nuclear reactor plants. That enriched uranium, as we heard from the ranking member, comes from Rosatom, which was exposed, as he mentioned, in the press recently as providing materials and other support to Russia's war effort in Ukraine. So in addition to a potential domestic ban on imports of Russian uranium, which I think is highly appropriate, what else could the U.S. be doing internationally to ensure that other nations don't indirectly support Russia's war effort through their nuclear sectors?
Thanks for the question, Senator. So there's a number of things here. While it is true that, for example, let's take some of the legacy Soviet-built plants, right, in Eastern Europe that are dependent on a particular version of nuclear fuel, we are seeing U.S. providers, Westinghouse in particular, of moving into that market and trying to develop capacity there, and they've signed a number of MOUs, including with Ukraine, to help to displace that fuel, so that's a very good signal there. Number two, my office has been working with State Department, with Commerce, with others, to really increase U.S. competitiveness on the market on nuclear power, and not just on the fuel side, but also on power generation itself. Very pleased to say that we just recently saw this great deal emerge between the U.S. and Poland to build their first 3 of their first 6 civilian nuclear reactors, which is going to be a $45 billion deal, support 130,000 American jobs. And I think third, it is that supply chain at home, but also the supply chain in other countries where we can rely on them as good partners. So diversification doesn't only mean independence, but it also means having reliable partners around the world. And through different international forums, we are trying to create that capacity there so we can stand together against Russia.
So we should leverage our allies to create
Absolutely.
that independence.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of putting it. We have to leverage our allies. We have to leverage our relationships. That's why our engagement in the world on energy in the midst of a struggle or even outside the current energy struggle is so important.
In June of last year, the Biden administration announced the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment with the G7. As part of that initiative, our government provided $14 million to support the first of its kind deployment of NuScale Power's small modular reactor in Romania. What role do you see SMRs playing to support our EU allies' transition away from Russian fossil gas, Russian fossil fuels broadly, and what are the hurdles to SMR deployment in Europe that we may be able to assist with?
So very quickly, this is the most exciting thing I think we have on the energy horizon right now, is the final emergence of SMRs as a real viable possibility. And I have to say, I've been absolutely impressed with the fact that The part of the world I've focused on the most with respect to who will deploy SMRs first is Eastern and Central Europe, and that was before the war started. So it's not only Romania, but it's interest in Bulgaria, it's interest in Poland, it's interest throughout the region where they have the expertise and the comfort of this kind of technology and seeing the advantages of SMRs, not only for electricity, but for district heating, for industrial decarbonization across the board. And we have many providers we've been incubating with your support for decades now, and they're ready to unleash. I think we've got to work with these countries on the regulatory side, making sure that they're ready for the import of this technology and even becoming regional hubs. And we have various programs throughout, again, many different international platforms that we've been working on with our partners at State and Commerce and others to help to create that groundwork so countries can accelerate their import of that technology as these become available. It's incredibly exciting.